Chandler from Mr. Beast videos suffers from a genetic eye condition called achromatopsia that only allows him to see the world in shades of white, black, and gray. It's a rare form of color blindness where all three cone types are completely absent from the eye, resulting in the inability to perceive any colors whatsoever. Scottish guitarist Les Harvey, known for performing with multiple rock bands throughout the 60s and 70s, narrowly escaped death in a fatal car crash in 1965, only to be fatally electrocuted on stage in 1972 after touching an ungrounded microphone. This gravestone is shared by twin sisters Emily and Minnie Dodsworth. Emily lived for just 2 days, while Minnie lived for over 100 years. In 2003, a Houston doctor stepped into an elevator when its doors malfunctioned and suddenly closed on him. The elevator then shot upward unexpectedly before the man could fully enter, instantly severing his head and shoulders while leaving the rest of his body in the hallway outside. A young nurse inside the elevator was physically unharmed but severely traumatized after she was stuck inside the elevator with the doctor's remains for several hours. These disturbing facts will completely shatter your perception of time. Joe Biden was born closer to Abe Lincoln's presidency than to his own. If someone born today were sworn in at age 78, the same age Biden was, they would become president in the year 2106. When the microchip was invented in 1958, Belgium was still displaying people from the Congo in human zoos. T-Rex lived closer in time to humans than to the Stegosaurus. Jack the Ripper was actively murdering people, Van Gogh painted Starry Night, the Eiffel Tower was completed, and Nintendo was founded, all in the year 1889. The 10th U.S. President, John Tyler, who was born in 1790, has grandchildren that are still alive today. The last widow of a Civil War veteran just died in 2020. 17-year-old Helen Jackson married 93-year-old James Bolin in 1936 so that she could claim his military pension after he died. And lastly, there are more slaves today than at any point in the history of the world. In one of the most horrifying cases of human captivity, Joseph Fritzl imprisoned his own daughter Elizabeth in a hidden basement beneath their Austrian home for 24 years, beginning in 1984. He repeatedly tortured and raped her, fathering 7 of her children, 3 of whom were raised in the underground dungeon without ever seeing daylight. The space was initially built as a bomb shelter and had no windows, was soundproofed, and could only be accessed through a series of hidden, electronically locked doors that Fritzl installed himself. The monster kept up a front by convincing authorities and his wife that Elizabeth had joined a cult, even forging letters to support the lie. But the case was exposed in 2008 when one of the captive children fell critically ill and was brought to a hospital, prompting an investigation. Fritzl was arrested, convicted of many awful crimes, and sentenced to life in a psychiatric facility. The dungeon was later sealed with concrete, while Elizabeth and her surviving children were placed under new identities. This photo, taken in 1995, shows a young boy carrying his dog while crossing the infamous Sniper Alley in Bosnia. During a 4-year-long siege of the capital, Serbian snipers targeted civilians to instill terror among the population. The siege resulted in the deaths of over 11,500 people, including more than 1,600 children, and left tens of thousands wounded. Children were shot while riding bikes, fetching water, or simply staring out the window, turning daily life into a death lottery. The boy's fate after this photograph was taken remains unknown. In 1994, British Parliament member Stephen Milligan was found dead in his London home under bizarre and scandalous circumstances. His body was partially dressed in women's lingerie with a plastic bag over his head, a cord around his neck, and a slice of orange in his mouth. His death was ruled as accidental, likely the result of autoerotic asphyxiation. Around 5000 BC, a man sat down in the harsh climate of Chile's Atacama Desert and has remained in that position ever since. The extreme dryness of the region naturally mummified the remains, leaving the skin, hair, and clothing astonishingly intact after more than 7,000 years. In other words, he's been Chilean there for a long time. Actor Daniel Hovels accidentally slit his own throat on stage during a 2008 theatrical performance after his prop knife was somehow switched out for a real one. The audience initially thought it was all just an elaborate special effect. The blade had just barely missed Hovels' carotid artery, but he was back on stage the next day. The leading cause of death for pregnant and postpartum women in America is homicide. This is often driven by partner violence that is escalated or triggered by the pregnancy, stemming from jealousy, fear of responsibility, and financial stress. In 2014, a crematorium in Virginia caught fire during the cremation of a 500-pound body. The excessive body fat caused the furnace to overheat, igniting the building's roof. A Florida musician known as Prince Midnight constructed a fully functional electric guitar he dubbed the Skelecaster, using the skeletal remains of his deceased Uncle Philip. Philip had donated his skeleton to a medical college in Greece, but after 2 decades, the school no longer had any use for them, so the remains were returned to his family. Prince Midnight decided to honor his uncle, who introduced him to heavy metal music, by turning his ribcage, spinal column, and pelvis into a guitar. Juana Barraza, known as the Little Old Lady Killer, was a Mexican professional wrestler who murdered at least 16 elderly women in Mexico City between 1998 and 2006. She posed as a social worker to gain access to her victims' homes, then strangled them, often with cords or her bare hands, and stole their belongings. Her strength and wrestling background, performing under the name the Lady of Silence, made her attacks especially brutal. Panic gripped the city as authorities struggled to solve the case until she was finally caught fleeing a murder scene. Barraza later confessed a deep resentment toward her abusive mother and was sentenced to 759 years in prison. Vlad the Impaler earned his name through the methodical terror he inflicted on his enemies. When the mighty Ottoman Empire invaded his territory in 1462, they were met with a nightmarish sight: a forest of 20,000 impaled corpses mounted on tall wooden stakes and left to rot beneath the scorching summer sun. The victims, captured soldiers, peasants, and anyone who defied Vlad, including children, were arranged with chilling precision, their decomposing bodies spreading a stench of death for miles. Upon seeing this grotesque display, Sultan Mehmed II was so disturbed that he ordered his army of 100,000 men to retreat. While filming Jackass No. 2, Johnny Knoxville attempted a motocross backflip that went horribly wrong when the bike crashed down handlebars first directly onto his crotch. Knoxville was immediately rushed to the hospital, where doctors discovered the trauma had torn his urethra and partially detached it from his bladder. For the next 3 years, he had to perform painful self-catheterization twice daily to keep the torn tissue from sealing shut. He later described the sensation of pushing a tube through the raw, unhealed tissue as like jamming a knife into an open wound every single day. The risk of infection was constant, and any mistake could have led to permanent urinary dysfunction or worse. In 1912, 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar vanished from his family's tent during a camping trip in Louisiana, sparking a frantic 8-month search. He was eventually found in Mississippi with another family who insisted that he was actually their son, Bruce Anderson. But sadly, the Andersons didn't have the money to fight this in court, so they lost custody of the child. The Dunbars took the boy home and raised him as their son Bobby Dunbar for the remainder of his life. Decades later, in 2004, DNA testing confirmed that the boy they took from the Andersons was not Bobby Dunbar, as the real Bobby Dunbar's fate remains unknown to this day. Actor Gaten Matarazzo, who plays Dustin in Stranger Things, was born with a rare genetic condition called cleidocranial dysplasia, affecting the development of bones and teeth. The condition left him without collarbones, caused severe dental issues, and required multiple painful surgeries. He was initially rejected from acting roles due to his appearance and speech, as his future in entertainment looked quite grim until Stranger Things incorporated his condition into the character. In more severe cases, CCD can lead to skull malformations, fragile bones, and life-threatening complications. Gaten now uses his platform to raise awareness and support others living with the condition. Nanny Doss was a seemingly sweet, smiling woman who murdered at least 11 members of her own family between the 1920s and 50s. Her victims included 4 husbands, 2 children, her own mother, 2 sisters, 2 grandsons, and a mother-in-law, most of whom died mysteriously in their sleep or after sudden bouts of illness. Doss used arsenic-laced foods, poisoned drinks, and other subtle methods to kill, often collecting the insurance money of the victims after murdering them. When she was finally arrested in 1954, she giggled through her confessions, earning her the nickname the Giggling Granny. Pop icon Claude Francois, often hailed as the French Elvis, met a gruesome end in 1978 when he tried to fix a flickering light bulb while standing in a bathtub filled with water. The 39-year-old received a severe electric shock that immediately fried his internal organs and stopped his heart. A family preparing to bury a loved one was shocked to find that one of the burial plots they had purchased was already occupied. Despite extensive efforts, no one could determine who the mystery individual was or how they ended up buried there. Rather than exhume the remains, the family decided to let the unknown person rest in peace, marking the grave with a headstone that simply read "Random Person." In the 1960s, the CIA was looking for creative ways to spy on the Russians without being noticed. That's when they came up with the genius idea to use a cat to record Russian conversations. A veterinary surgeon implanted a microphone in the cat's ear and a radio transmitter at the base of its skull. The plan was for the cat to be released near a Soviet embassy and innocuously record any dialogue amongst the men. But after 5 years of research and $20 million in funding, the cat was struck and killed by a taxicab almost immediately. In case you need a few reasons to feel thankful for your mom, these are some of the worst mothers of all time. Suffering from severe postpartum psychosis in 2001, Andrea Yates methodically drowned her 5 children one by one in the family bathtub. She believed she was saving them from eternal damnation and was committed to a mental asylum for the rest of her life. Over a 14-year span, Mary Beth Tinning's children kept dying mysteriously, 9 of them in total. The cause of death for the first few was thought to be genetic, but it was later revealed she had smothered most of them to gain sympathy and attention. In 1983, Diane Downs shot her 3 children in cold blood, killing one and paralyzing another, simply because the man she was dating didn't like kids. She then drove them to the hospital slowly while her children were screaming in agony beside her. Blanche Monier's mother imprisoned her in a windowless room for 25 years, simply because she fell in love with a man her family deemed unsuitable. Under her mother's control, Blanche was kept in darkness, starved, and left to rot in her own filth, until authorities discovered her in 1901 weighing just 55 pounds and barely clinging on to life. Between 1996 and 2006, Megan Huntsman secretly gave birth to 7 infants and killed each one immediately after birth, hiding the tiny bodies in cardboard boxes in her garage. Her family discovered them years later and she was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Spanish woman Aurora Rodriguez conceived her daughter Hildegard as an experiment to create the perfect human. Hildegard became a prodigy, reading at age 2, speaking 4 languages by 8, and entering law school by the age of 13. But when she eventually sought independence as an adult, Aurora declared the experiment a failure and shot her daughter in her sleep. She later said the sculptor, after discovering the most minimal imperfection in his work, destroys it. She spent most of her 26-year sentence in a mental asylum. A French woman was scammed out of 830,000 euros after falling for an elaborate scheme involving an AI-generated version of Brad Pitt. It began in 2023 when someone posing as Pitt's mother contacted her online, followed by Brad himself claiming he was battling kidney cancer and desperately needed financial help or else he was gonna die. He sent AI-generated hospital photos showing himself bruised and hooked up to machines. Over time, the woman was manipulated into believing they were in a secret relationship, one he swore had to be kept quiet because of restrictive Hollywood contracts. She even believed they were engaged and that he planned to move to France to marry her. She wired him thousands for fake medical bills and customs fees for luxury gifts that he sent her but never arrived. After her husband divorced her over the delusion, she sent the scammers 775,000 euros she received from the settlement. Despite repeated warnings, she insisted it was true love until she eventually realized she had thrown her entire life away for a fake person. Best known as the original voice for nearly all the female characters in South Park, prolific voice actress Mary Kay Bergman stunned the animation world in 1999 when she took her own life at the young age of 38. Despite her cheerful public persona and thriving career, she was secretly battling severe mental illness, later identified as bipolar disorder and anxiety, which she kept hidden from friends, colleagues, and even her husband, fearing it would damage her career. Mary's sudden death sent shockwaves through the voice acting community, since no one had any idea she was suffering behind the scenes. A poor spider that was posthumously named Lawrence got stuck in this glass and couldn't climb up the smooth surface. So it apparently tried to web its way to the top until its silk ran out and it eventually perished. In 2020, Russian influencer Yekaterina Didenko's 29th birthday celebration at a Moscow pool complex turned tragic when approximately 55 pounds of dry ice were poured into the swimming pool. Intended to create a fog effect, the dry ice produced a massive amount of carbon dioxide gas upon making contact with the water, leading to suffocation and chemical burns among attendees. 3 people ended up dying as a result, including Didenko's husband, who succumbed to his injuries in the hospital. According to David Bowie's ex-wife Angela, she once walked in on David and Mick Jagger naked in bed together after a long night of partying. Angela took it as clear evidence of a sexual encounter, though neither Bowie nor Jagger ever confirmed it. Jagger dismissed the rumor as rubbish, while Bowie avoided commenting on it altogether. In the late 1800s, long before the invention of discrete vibrators, early models were massive mechanical contraptions powered by steam, hand cranks, or foot pedals. These devices were used by doctors to treat what was then diagnosed as female hysteria, a vague and outdated condition believed to cause anxiety, irritability, and sexual frustration. Rock Bitch, a provocative all-women British rock band infamous for their wildly sexualized live shows, had a notorious ritual during their concerts. They'd hurl a golden condom into the crowd, and whoever caught it, regardless of gender, was chosen to join them backstage for a night of uninhibited sexual escapades with the band. A 2003 study found that roughly 1 in 200 men globally share a nearly identical Y chromosome, all tracing back to one common male ancestor who lived about 800 years ago in the Mongol Empire region. The researchers linked this genetic legacy to Genghis Khan, giving the timing, geography, and his notorious reputation for spreading his seed like wildfire across his vast empire. In 2005, Thomas Montgomery, a 46-year-old married man from New York, created an online persona named Tommy, presenting himself as an 18-year-old Marine. Using this catfish, he began an online relationship with a 17-year-old girl from West Virginia named Jessie. But Montgomery's coworker, 22-year-old Brian Barrett, also became involved with Jessie online. When Jessie started shifting her attention to Barrett without him having to catfish her, Montgomery became consumed with jealousy. Eventually, Montgomery ambushed Barrett in their workplace parking lot and shot him 3 times with a military-style rifle, with one bullet piercing his neck as he sat in his car. Tommy was later arrested and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, receiving 20 years in prison. But the story didn't stop there. In a final shocking twist, it was revealed that the teen girl they'd both been obsessed with was actually a 45-year-old housewife who was using her daughter's photos to catfish men online. In 2002, New York City bartender Sean Doyle was out drinking with his friend Michael Wright when a drunken argument suddenly broke out after Wright accused Doyle of flirting with his girlfriend. In a fit of rage, Wright threw Doyle down an open manhole and he immediately started screaming in agony from below. The shaft led down to a steam tunnel where a ruptured vent had caused the water temperature to reach an estimated 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Doyle survived the fall and was pleading for help while trapped in the boiling water, but the heat and steam were far too intense for rescuers to reach him. Witnesses reported hearing his screams echoing through the streets like a whistling tea kettle, then abruptly stopping. His body was finally recovered 4 hours later, and the medical examiner later described the scene as one of the worst she'd ever seen. The metal of his belt buckle had partially fused with his pelvis, and steam had filled up his lungs until they completely ruptured. His skin had completely peeled away, and his organs were essentially steamed like a lobster. In 2012, a freak accident saved this woman's life in the craziest way possible. 42-year-old Donna Barber was at a family gathering in Arkansas when her teenage son accidentally shot her straight in the neck with a bow and arrow. The arrow pierced the side of her throat just inches from her carotid artery, close enough that she could feel her pulse pounding against the shaft. For a moment, Dawn remained standing in shock before collapsing in a pool of her own blood. As her family screamed in panic, some believing they just witnessed her death, she was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. But during emergency scans, doctors made a chilling discovery. Nestled deep in her neck, not far from the arrow's path, was a cancerous tumor growing in her thyroid. It hadn't caused any symptoms yet, and without the arrow, it likely would have gone unnoticed until it was far too late. Surgeons carefully removed the arrow then the tumor in a single surgery, and Dawn miraculously went on to make a full recovery. In August of 1993, 4-year-old Derek Roby had been walking alone to summer camp when 13-year-old Eric Smith lured him into the woods under the guise of showing him a new shortcut. Once they were out of sight, Smith strangled Derek until he was unconscious, brutally smashed his head with a large rock, then poured Kool-Aid into the boy's wounds. Before fleeing the scene, Smith removed one of Derek's shoes and scattered the contents of his lunchbox all around him, creating a disturbing and almost ritualistic display that baffled investigators. The child's body was found later that day, just yards from the park he never made it to. Smith later confessed and was tried as an adult despite his young age, receiving 9 years to life in prison. He was denied parole 10 times over the years, with Derek's family attending each hearing to oppose his release. After 27 years behind bars, Smith was finally granted parole in 2022, sparking debates about whether someone capable of such violence at 13 can ever truly be reformed. In the summer of 1974, 18-year-old Disneyland cast member Deborah Gale was assigned to the newly opened America Sings ride in Tomorrowland, a rotating theater that featured animatronic animals singing songs from different eras of American history. The attraction had only been open for 9 days when something went horribly wrong during her shift on July 8th. At some point during the rotation, Deborah became caught in a narrow gap between a moving theater wall and a stationary platform. As the mechanism turned, she was crushed in the machinery, likely killing her immediately. Guests seated nearby heard her screams followed by a loud thud, but tragically mistook both for sound effects from the show. In 2009, a member of Al-Qaeda attempted to assassinate Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Nayef by hiding a pound of explosives inside his anus, an unprecedented tactic at the time. Disguised as a remorseful militant surrendering during Ramadan, the terrorist was allowed close access to the prince and even passed through metal detectors without detection. Once face to face, he detonated the device, but his own body absorbed most of the blast, killing him instantly while only slightly injuring the startled prince. Adult star Faye Reagan appeared in over 400 films before vanishing into obscurity following her 2014 retirement. Her life quickly spiraled into constant legal troubles, hard drug use, and homelessness. On May 7th of this year, she mysteriously disappeared from East Charleston Boulevard in Las Vegas, a corridor infamous for crime and desperation. Last seen wearing green sweatpants and carrying a backpack, Reagan has not been seen or heard from since. Photographer Sam Davis captured the incredible moment a snake eel burst out from a heron's stomach while the bird was still flying, having chewed its way through the heron's throat using its pointed tail. Both animals were likely fatally injured. In the 90s, Disney planned to open a theme park called Disney's America near the Civil War battlefields in Virginia. A Disney executive said the park would let visitors feel what it was like to be a slave. Amid intense public outrage and political pressure, Disney ended up scrapping the disastrous project. In 2018, Demi Lovato was found unconscious in her Los Angeles home after ingesting a mix of heroin laced with fentanyl. Her assistant discovered her unresponsive and thought she was already dead since her skin had turned blue. Paramedics administered Narcan to save her life, but what followed was far worse than most people realize. Lovato suffered 3 strokes, a heart attack, and severe brain damage due to a prolonged lack of oxygen from the overdose. She was legally blind for several days and still has blind spots in her vision which affect her ability to drive. She had developed organ failure and placed on dialysis as doctors told her she was only minutes away from death. Even after surviving, her motor skills were severely damaged and she had to relearn how to walk. Demi later admitted that she had asked her dealer for heroin but was instead given fentanyl without her knowledge. Lovato has since spoken openly about the trauma, referring to the near-death experience as the biggest wake-up call of her life. Celine Dion lost both her husband and brother to cancer within the same week in 2016. She performed shortly after their deaths, later saying the stage was the only place she didn't feel pain. In 2021, a 45-year-old man named Thangula Satish died in India after his rooster, armed with a 3-inch blade for an illegal cockfight, slashed his groin as it tried to escape, severing a major artery and causing him to bleed out before he reached the hospital. The rooster was briefly detained at a police station before being transferred to a local farm. In 1974, the mutilated body of a woman was found neatly placed on a beach blanket in the dunes of Provincetown, Massachusetts. Her hands were missing, her teeth removed, and her skull was crushed on one side, yet her hair was styled and her toenails painted. Known for decades only as the Lady of the Dunes, her identity remained a mystery despite widespread speculation. Over the years, she was linked to escaped convicts, mob enforcers, and even a missing extra from the film set of Jaws. Finally, in 2022, nearly 50 years later, forensic genealogy identified her as 37-year-old Ruth Marie Terry from Tennessee, and her husband, a conman with a dark past, was named the likely killer. In honor of Memorial Day, these are some of the most badass American soldiers in history who gave their life for their country. During World War II, American Lieutenant John Fox died after deliberately calling an artillery strike on himself. Realizing that German troops were overriding his position, the strike delayed the enemy long enough for other American units to organize a counterattack that ultimately won them the battle. In 1944, American Private Edward Ahrens was found clutching a sword surrounded by 13 dead Japanese soldiers. Barely hanging on to life, his final words were, "I guess they didn't know I was a Marine." Hugh Redman was an American paratrooper who later spied on communists in China for the CIA. He was captured in 1951 and endured 19 years of brutal torture since he refused to reveal who he was working for. Most likely murdered by his captors, his ashes were sent home in 1970, and he was given a headstone that read, "His country above all else." During World War II, American Private Thomas Baker was gravely wounded by the Japanese but refused to give up the fight. He ordered his squad to leave him propped up against a tree with nothing but a pistol and 8 bullets. He was later found dead with the empty pistol and the bodies of 8 Japanese soldiers scattered around him. Beloved by millions, Latina singer Selena was on the verge of global superstardom when cracks began to show behind the scenes of her fame. One of her most devoted fans, Yolanda Saldivar, had pushed her way into Selena's inner circle, first as president of her fan club, then as manager of her boutiques. But what began as genuine admiration eventually spiraled into obsession and control. Yolanda grew possessive, isolating Selena from others, and was soon suspected of embezzling money. In March of 1995, Selena met her at a Corpus Christi motel to retrieve crucial financial documents. Backed into a corner and fearing exposure, Yolanda pulled out a revolver and shot Selena in the back as she tried to leave. Selena managed to run nearly 400 feet to the lobby, leaving a trail of blood behind her before collapsing. With her final breath, she named her killer as Yolanda Saldivar, the woman who was once her biggest fan. During a pro wrestling tag team match in 2015, Rey Mysterio delivered a routine dropkick intended to set up his signature 619 move against Perro Aguayo Jr., but Aguayo slumped lifelessly onto the ropes. Unbeknownst to everyone at first, Aguayo had suffered a fatal cervical spine injury, likely caused by the whiplash to his neck from the dropkick. The match eerily continued on for several minutes before anyone realized that something was seriously wrong. Aguayo was soon rushed to the hospital, but was pronounced dead shortly afterwards. The cause of death was later determined to be cardiac arrest due to a cervical stroke caused by 3 fractured vertebrae. The coroner stated that the fractures took place at 2 different moments of impact and that Aguayo died almost immediately. Although Mysterio bore no blame, the incident left him devastated since Aguayo had been his longtime friend. It remains one of the only times a pro wrestler died during a match from in-ring trauma. When Steve Burns suddenly left Blue's Clues in 2002, dark rumors quickly began to circulate, including claims that he had vanished in a tragic accident or died from a heroin overdose. In reality, he simply felt that it was time to move on as he began balding and could no longer see himself on a children's show. The day after filming his final episode, Steve shaved his head and stepped away from the cheery world of Blue's Clues, retreating into obscurity to pursue a somber indie music career. The death hoaxes that followed weighed heavily on him, intensifying his struggles with depression and casting a long, unexpected shadow on the legacy he left behind. In 2002, reclusive hoarder Bruce Andrew Roberts shot and killed an intruder who had broken into his home. Instead of reporting the incident, Roberts hid the body in a spare bedroom, covered it with a rug, and used over 70 bottles of air freshener to mask the smell. He lived alongside the mummified corpse for 15 years until it was finally discovered during a cleanup after his death. At age 43, French journalist Jean-Dominique Bauby suffered a bad stroke and became paralyzed. He ended up being diagnosed with the nightmarish condition of locked-in syndrome, where his mind was fully intact, but he couldn't move any part of his body except for one of his eyelids. Bauby eventually blinked out a 130-page novel that was a bestseller, passing away just 2 days after it was published. Creator of Naruto Masashi Kishimoto endured a grueling work schedule that pushed him to the brink of physical and emotional collapse. He routinely worked up to 20 hours per day, leading to several hospitalizations, and even missing the birth of his own child due to crushing deadlines. By the final arcs of Naruto, he admitted to feeling emotionally numb, simply trying to survive the demands of the series. Writing certain death scenes took a drastic personal toll on him, and he received constant death threats from fans over controversial plot decisions. Much of his work was inspired by feelings of deep isolation and insecurity, stemming from his youth and the constant comparisons to his twin brother. These personal struggles bled into Naruto's themes of loneliness, rejection, and the desperate need for acknowledgement. In 1992, Pepsi launched a promotion in the Philippines called Number Fever, offering 1 million pesos to anyone with the winning bottle cap number, a life-changing prize for most people in the country at the time. On May 25th, the winning number announced was 349, but due to a printing error, over 600,000 caps with that number had been distributed. Thousands of people thought they had won, only to be told their prizes wouldn't be honored, and chaos quickly ensued. Riots broke out, Pepsi trucks were bombed, and at least 5 people were killed, including a mother and her child when a grenade was thrown at a delivery truck. Pepsi offered small consolation payments, but the damage was done. The scandal became one of the most infamous marketing disasters in history, and Pepsi never fully regained public trust in the Philippines. In 2019, 18-year-old Denali Bremer from Alaska was messaged by a wealthy tycoon named Tyler, who promised her $9 million if she murdered someone and sent him the proof. Convinced the offer was real, Bremer recruited several friends whom she told she would split the money with, and they chose to target 19-year-old Cynthia Hoffman, a developmentally disabled girl who considered Bremer her best friend. The group lured Cynthia on a fake hiking trip to Thunderbird Falls, where they bound her with duct tape and led her to a remote spot. That's when one of the friends shot her in the back of the head while Bremer filmed the murder and sent the footage to Tyler, after which they dumped the body in the river. Authorities uncovered the plot through digital evidence, leading to multiple arrests. Tyler ended up being an unemployed catfisher named Darren Schillmiller who lived in his parents' basement in Indiana. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 99 years in prison, the same sentence handed to Bremer. Ezra Miller has a long track record of disturbingly erratic and violent behavior that has deeply tarnished his public image. In 2020, Miller was caught on video choking a woman and throwing her to the ground outside of a bar in Iceland, an act the victim later confirmed was not staged. In 2022, he was arrested multiple times in Hawaii for aggressive outbursts, including lunging at patrons in a karaoke bar and throwing a chair that struck a woman in the head. That same year, Miller was accused of grooming a 12-year-old girl and using drugs, intimidation, and emotional manipulation to control her. He then hosted a woman and her children inside a home in Vermont that was allegedly filled with unattended firearms and marijuana, where one toddler reportedly nearly choked on a bullet. Reports have also surfaced of Miller claiming to be a messianic figure, identifying as both Jesus and the devil. With his career now in shambles, Miller has acknowledged his suffering from complex mental health issues. In 2003, 28-year-old marine biologist Kirsty Brown became the first known human killed by a leopard seal while she was snorkeling near a research station in Antarctica. Without warning, the seal grabbed her by the head and dragged her beneath the icy water, diving down for several minutes and resurfacing with her body before diving down again several times, eventually pulling her as deep as 230 feet. Her colleagues watched helplessly as the powerful predator treated her like prey, mimicking the way it would typically toy with penguins before drowning them. After holding her underwater for 6 minutes, the seal finally released Kirsty, but despite desperate CPR attempts, she never regained consciousness. In 2012, NYPD officer Gilberto Valle was arrested after his wife discovered he'd been posting on fetish forums about kidnapping, torturing, and eating women, including her. He had detailed abduction plans, photos of real women he said he was targeting, and even searched online for recipes for cooking human meat. The FBI found his chats on a site called Dark Fetish Net, where he discussed taking advantage of his police access to stalk victims. Though convicted in 2013 for conspiracy to kidnap, his conviction was later overturned when a judge ruled the evidence was insufficient to prove intent, calling the chats fantasy roleplay. An appeals court upheld the acquittal, stating that, while disturbing, his actions were protected under the First Amendment. While filming The Wolf of Wall Street, Martin Scorsese originally planned for Margot Robbie's character Naomi to wear a robe during a seduction scene. But Margot insisted on performing the scene naked, arguing that it was more authentic to Naomi's character. She later explained that her body is the only form of currency in this world, and felt the nudity was essential to conveying that dynamic. Scorsese didn't argue with her decision, recognizing that it served to the story. King Tut is the only mummy from ancient Egypt known to have been purposely mummified with an erection, which was accidentally broken off soon after his mummy was discovered. If you had to take a dump back in ancient Rome, forget about privacy. Public latrines contained toilets that were lined side by side with no dividers, as these bathrooms were often social hubs where people would gossip while doing their business. Some latrines could seat over a dozen people at a time, elbow to elbow, making communal defecation a totally normal and accepted part of daily Roman life. Once they were done dropping some cargo, they also had to wipe themselves with a sponge on a stick that everyone shared.